Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, bro?
Not too much, brother. Today we're going to be chatting about the RCMP proposing a new law to criminalize harassing politicians. WEF wants families to abandon at least one car. A Trudeau-appointed Senate could stifle the future of a conservative government in Canada. The Canadian government allocating $224 per day for each illegal immigrant to cover their cost of living. Canada just starting its largest tax increase that you've never heard of, as well as an Ottawa think tank calling TikTok China's Trojan horse and urging Canada to ban the app. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind leaving us a kind review on Spotify or subscribing to our YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got the RCMP proposing a new law to criminalize shit-talking politicians. RCMP Commissioner Mike Doom has proposed a new law to make it easier to address threats against politicians. He wants the government to create a law that would allow the RCMP to quickly charge those who threaten elected officials. Doom noted a significant increase in threatening comments and dissatisfaction directed at politicians. However, many of these comments don't meet the criteria in the criminal code for charging someone. Doom is looking for a new tool to deal with this situation. He plans to work with Public Safety Canada and the Department of Justice to change the criminal code. Doom also commented on the importance of people freely expressing their thoughts, but emphasized the need for civility. So is this a legitimate attempt at protecting politicians or another attack on freedom of expression?
It's 100% an attack on free speech. That's all that this is. You know, when I was putting this article together, I kind of realized that it's really just a Trudeau charged initiative, which is being implemented because he's being berated by Canadians all over the country for running this place into the ground, right? And so I kind of looked up the criminal code too to be like, I already thought there was adequate measures in place for threats, right? You got to think, okay, how does a society operate if something like that is legal? He's saying, well, a lot of these things are happening, but there's no net to catch these people in. They're a real problem. So I was like, that doesn't really track. So I looked it up. So under the criminal code, under section 264.1, it's already an offense to knowingly threaten someone in any way, including by written word or verbally. So this covers social media already. The law considers threats of violence causing death, bodily harm, or damaging property as criminal offenses. The seriousness of the offense depends on the nature of the threat. Threats of violence, of course, have heavier penalties than threats of property damage. That makes sense. And the maximum sentence for threatening violence is imprisonment for up to 5 years. So criminalizing threats are clearly not the issue here, right? This is a snatch and grab on free speech, specifically when expressed against politicians, which I find completely absurd considering they're being rightfully criticized for their performance. I mean, when was it? Like 6 months ago or something, when 200 or 300 people went to harass Justin Trudeau at a dinner he was having in British Columbia at 10 p.m. and they found out at 10 o'clock. You can't get me out of bed at that time. There's 200-300 people there ripping this guy. Like, obviously it's what he deserves, right? Anyway, it's pretty fair to assume that any new legislation put in place will be vague. It will allow for broad interpretation and enforce disproportionate penalties, like a lot of these new bills we're seeing that are coming through the liberal policy lately. It's also likely to include something in online speech and could be coupled with more social media guidelines so that big tech is sort of forced to enforce more government censorship. So yeah, I'm of the opinion we really need to push back here.
It's just hilarious to me that these politicians sat there for the last couple of years scapegoating the crap out of anti-vaxxers or the unvaccinated. You know, Trudeau famously stating that a lot of them are misogynist racists, also asking on a French program whether we should tolerate these people, what we should do with them as a society, whether it be that or whether it's the Toronto Sun talking about how you should just let all unvaccinated people die and not give them any hospital attention. We saw countless late night TV talk show hosts doing the same. And yeah, again, there was never, you were considered, you would get scapegoated even if you were fully vaccinated, but didn't think that unvaccinated people were deserving of all of that.
It got pretty
rhetoric.
wild. I was reading, actually, it's funny, Sergio, he posted something on Instagram earlier today, just of the Toronto Star headlines. That was some vile shit they posted. And Jimmy Kimmel, like, I was never really a fan of the guy, but I don't really hate people. I hate that guy. He is actually a total, everything he said through the pandemic was insane. And they gave him a platform, like, yeah, keep on going. Keep vilifying everyone that's not doing what you're doing and keep dividing the world. What a douche.
Yeah, they were equating anybody that didn't get the shot to grandma killers and such, right?
That wild.
You're more or less putting death on my hands if I didn't do this. And then, yeah, so for them to sit here and then now try to overhaul the legal system, or not overhaul it, but make changes so that they can crack down on people getting angry in comment sections, which 110% is increasing. I mean, you can't make a post these days about anything going on in Canada without somebody threatening a Canadian politician.
People do say some crazy shit, but look, I here's the thing. Like, I'm very much a free speech absolutist. I don't think any speech should be made illegal. Anything. I don't care. I believe that if you're gonna threatening people to actually harm them, I could see that maybe being an issue. But like, otherwise, I don't really have a problem with people saying things that suck, because society's a really good barometer for whether or not it's good or positive speech. It will promote it, or it will get squashed by better speech. That's why I'm like, you just have to kind of let it happen and let it do its thing. Sure, it comes with more negatives, but I think it's that important for society. And like you said before, if you limit free speech, you actually limit people's understanding of issues in a much deeper sense, because you also limit their thinking. If you can't explain something to someone because it's limited by free speech, you don't give them the opportunity to see the other side of things. And the reality is this, look, politics in their very nature are divisive. You think one thing and this other person thinks the opposite. So the idea is that you come together and you find compromise. But if you can't have a conversation because you're limited by free speech, there's no compromise. There's just one person's way. And that's kind of what Trudeau and the Liberals are doing these days.
For sure. And those emotions, that genuine anger and resentment that people have, isn't going to go away when you don't allow them to comment.
It's going to get worse.
If anything, it's going to get worse. It's that idea that Freud once said, unexpressed emotions never die. They simply get buried alive and come forth later in uglier ways. And it's 100%. The very same thing. Humans, we are always in a state of either communication or conflict. And the minute that you shut down that communication, you've already just pushed it into the territory of conflict. And that's 100% what will occur, is these people will then just end up trying to look for other ways outside of speech to push those feelings across.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that kind of annoying for me here is this is the RCMP proposing this law, right? So what frustrates me is that they are now they're already the government's weapon. We already kind of know they're kind of their militia, their mercenaries. I think there's a lot of good people in those organizations, but that's kind of what they're there for, right? You see how they were handling protests, whether it was for carbon tax or whether it was for COVID or anything like that. You kind of see, you're like, hey guys, you're crossing the line here. You're not really here for the people. You're a government militia. Cool, got it. But now they're backing him on pushing this free speech policy, which is concerning, right? Because you're seeing these organizations now work in lockstep to sort of limit our free speech. And as you and I both know, it's a cat and mouse game. And when governments are losing power, they try to suppress it more and more. So it is concerning. This is not a good sign for Canadians, because if it was just some liberal crackhead coming up with some idea to limit free speech again, I'd be like, oh, cool, this again. But the fact that it's the RCMP, the ones enforcing a lot of these things, I don't know, man. That's got me a little bit more concerned than usual.
There is an upside on the whole front for Canadian censorship, at least, with the contentious Online Streaming Act being delayed until 2025, though. So the Trudeau government's controversial Online Streaming Act, colloquially known as the Online Censorship Bill, will be delayed until late 2025 as per a new regulatory plan by the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. The law aims to make platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime and Spotify, along with online news channels, websites, and even podcasts that make over $10 million per year, prioritize a certain volume of Canadian content, subjecting them to the same regulations as the CBC and other mainstream networks. The kicker is that these platforms also have to financially contribute to the Canadian government to fund state-sponsored content production. So, at least it's getting pushed back to 2025, meaning that if Trudeau doesn't get into office, or if the Liberals don't get into office, then this bill will likely never see the light of day?
Yeah, it's very likely to happen. But you know what's funny about that is this is because of government incompetence. That's why. They are such a slow-moving organization, they couldn't even implement their own policy. That's exactly what this was. Like, well, we can't decide what Canadian content is or how much Indigenous content we need to have. We're going to think about it for another year. That's basically what they said. It's just preposterous.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to our second story of the day, we've got the WEF wanting families to abandon at least one car. So the World Economic Forum is promoting a quote-unquote one less car lifestyle, encouraging families to reduce car ownership. This initiative is based on a study in Australia where 58 participants gave up one car for 4 weeks, relying more on walking, biking, and public transportation. The WEF emphasizes the need to move away from the quote-unquote one person, one car mindset and suggests policy reforms to support this transition, offering multiple transportation options to citizens. Additionally, Canada's Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, faces scrutiny for a secret meeting with the WEF during her January trip to Davos, raising concerns about a conflict of interest due to her membership on the WEF's Board of Trustees. So will the WEF be successful in achieving the goal of zero private car ownership as outlined in the C40 initiatives?
Well, this is just one more step towards it, right? That's what this really is. You look at kind of their concept of 15-minute cities and how they're trying to implement that. This is just one more notch in that belt, essentially. You know what I mean? I don't know whether or not they're gonna be able to get everybody down to zero cars. I think there's gonna be enough people pushing back, but this again, it's like, it's a death by 1,000 cuts is probably a better way to look at it, right? They don't push you off a cliff. It's just slowly they continue to take away more and more and more. They push these things out into the media. They do tests with 58 people to tell you what makes sense. And it was only that one test they did in Australia to say that, hey, you guys need to get rid of your cars. Like I think they also mentioned like, well, EVs will help, but it's not gonna be enough. You just got to get rid of them. Again, this just all kind of funnels back to a loss of individual freedom and more control.
Yeah, the way they're going to do it too is they're not just going to come down and crack down and say we're going to forcefully take away everyone's cars or they're just going to make it so hard for you to be able to afford and use a car.
Exactly.
That and then they'll gaslight you and say, well, it was your choice. You know, is same thing with the vaccines is, you know, we'll take away your job. We won't allow you into public spaces, but hey, it's completely your choice whether we get this. It's like, no, you're coercing me into this decision. And obviously, this is all being done on the back of saving the planet, right? And it's this forgetting of the way that things used to be and not acknowledging any improvements that we have made along the way. So, for instance, many who condemn the automobile for pollution seem to imagine a pre-automobile society very different from the way the pre-automobile world was in fact. The streets of New York City in the 19th century were an example. Much of the pollution followed from the still unavoidable reliance on horses, 40,000 of them, who each working day generated some 400 tons of manure, 20,000 gallons of urine, and almost 200 carcasses. So a 1972 study showed that the amount of pollution per mile traveled by horse was 100 times the amount of pollution per mile traveled by automobile. Since the cars produced in later years have had reduced pollution levels, the disparity today would be even greater. It should also be noted that the replacement of horses by automobiles made it possible to, quote, restore more than 80 million acres of forest land that had been once cleared for horse pasture. It's just completely turning a blind eye to the way that we have actually improved. And because it's not perfect, then we have to do away with it all.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, gaslighting is a great word to use. They're just saying there's not a lot of research going into their policy strategy here, right? And the thing is, because they're trying to implement this through policy, they're going to do exactly what you said, and it's going to be a lot more money for gas. They're already tacking the carbon tax on that. It's going to cost more for automobiles. Like you said, they're going to try to stop producing them by 2035, which I don't think is going to happen. But you see, those are the things that they're moving towards. But what other taxes can they add to them? Then they're going to start everything's going to be a toll route. Like it's pretty easy that these are just going to be taxes on people that don't have a lot of money. It's going to be taxes on the middle class, poor and middle class, right? But again, you gotta wonder when you see stuff like this. Every time they make a move that sort of lacks logic, it's just one more reason for everybody to sort of doubt these people and push back. And I'm hoping that we kind of get to this point, like this critical mass. We get to a tipping point, essentially, where they do enough stuff like this, where they try to take enough away from you in ways that really don't make any sense, that enough people just say, hey, okay, we've had enough. Because like anytime in society people have had enough and they revolt, the one thing that everybody always says after you kind of look back and you go, oh, there was power in numbers. That's what these things are all about. Power. As soon as enough people realize we have a lot more power, and as long as enough of us are motivated to change it, they have no chance. And when they keep doing stuff like this, I think we're getting closer to that point.
Yeah, I don't know how these people stand and say that they're for the disaffected or the middle class and all of this kind of stuff, and then also be pushing forward an agenda to get rid of private car ownership. Another study that was done in Portland, Oregon, found that residents could reach 99% of the region's jobs within 20 minutes by car, but they could not even reach half that number of jobs by taking mass transit for twice as long. The study also found that people with no high school diploma were 80% more likely to have a job if they had a car, and they earned an additional $1,000 per month. That same study found that getting a car enabled such people to get a job more than getting a high school equivalency diploma.
Right.
So, you know, cars are pivotal for our ability to earn a living, and also even just the freedom of mobility aspect. You know, you were talking about the power in numbers thing. Well, how are we supposed to be powerful in numbers if we can't mobilize?
No, I totally agree with you. And it's interesting too, because their solution to that is going to be, don't worry, we're going to stick you in a 15-minute city. Because that's what this is, right? That's the direction they're steering this, because this really isn't to save the environment. So what is it then? You go, okay, well, the thing that you're telling me for, it's not. Well, you're gaslighting me about that. So what is the reality here? Well, that's all it is. Like you said, well, you can't get to work. No problem. We'll create more job opportunities in this small little space. Can't get to the grocery store? No problem. We'll just do it like this. Whatever the crux of the issue is, that's going to be their solution. We'll just compact you into these little areas. Don't worry, we've got it covered. So I just think everybody should be seeing these things as red flags and, you know, again, mobilizing to eventually push back.
Yeah, I think the biggest example of the hypocrisy is something you outlined in the newsletter recently as well, which was the cost of Canada's COP28 climate conference attendance, featuring a rapper, which hit $3 million. So new figures reveal that the Canadian government more than doubled its spending for last year's high-profile UN climate change summit, COP28. Initially reported at nearly $1.4 million, costs have now surged to approximately $3 million to fly and lodge 182 government-sponsored delegates in Dubai from November 30th to December 12th, 2023. This significant increase comes as part of a response to an order paper questioned sourced by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault's airfare cost $13,239, with $4,461 spent on his 12-night stay at the Delta hotels and $2,262 for meals and incidentals. Additionally, establishing the Canada Pavilion at COP28, which featured daily programming and a climate change hip-hop performance by Canadian rapper Baba Brinkman, who is the son of a Liberal MP, Joyce Murray, and that cost taxpayers $1.3 million. Have you seen the rap?
No, I can't. I won't. It's the whole thing pisses me off, because I think what I wrote in this is I was like, this does not benefit Canadians in any way. There's no return on investment and no accountability. And I think when I did the math too for the 128 people, I think we spent over $16,000 per person for those 12 days. And that's like over $1,300 a day for them to be there. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing?
Well, if I had to listen to this rap, so do you. Here
no,
you go.
Fuck you.
This is what Canadian taxpayer dollars are being spent for.
Climate disinformation, get that immunization, the vaccine for bad meme infiltration. Climate misinformation, it leads to polarization, which leads to radical conspiracy ideation. Simultaneous translation between conspiracy theories and violent means of change embracement. Economic incentives or ideological basis, it doesn't matter, because either way it's still disinformation.
That is so bad. That is so bad. Oh my God, Canada. What is happening to this country?
All right, our third story for the day. We've got a Trudeau-appointed Senate could stifle the future Conservative government. So despite the potential strength of a Conservative win in the upcoming election, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau holds significant power to obstruct the Tory agenda for years to come, largely due to his influence in appointing senators. As of now, Trudeau has personally appointed 70 out of 105 senators, and he may appoint 12 more before his term ends. This means that even with a strong Conservative mandate, the Senate will likely have a Liberal supermajority, giving them the ability to block or significantly delay Conservative-led legislation. A report published in the Hub outlines the risk of a constitutional crisis if the Senate, dominated by Liberal appointees, chooses to oppose a Conservative government's legislative plans. This situation could lead to a prolonged deadlock in Canadian politics, reminiscent of historical crises dating back over a century. So does this mean that even if Pierre had all of the solutions to Canada's problems, which is a big if, that he will struggle to even implement them?
Yeah. I've been saying this for months now. Our Senate, which is appointed by the Prime Minister using a proxy organization, they carry extreme power, and it's been stacked by Trudeau for two reasons, obviously. Really, one is to give him a majority. So along with his coalition agreement with the NDP, when you have complete control of the Senate, you basically just bulldoze anything through that you want. And then second, and it's quite significant, is this roadblock that is going to be for the Conservative Party. This is going to be a real problem. There's also, I don't know if you mentioned it, there's the term limit is really an age thing. So you can be a senator up until you're 75. So you can sit the whole time. So if enough of them sit there and want to push back, and a number of the ones that were currently elected are relatively young, like under 50. So I don't think they generally stay for more than 8 to 10 years. That seems to be like kind of a standard length for a senator. I'm not really sure if that's based on age or just preference. But they could be a real hurdle for the Canadian people for quite some time.
I think it's hilarious how people will lose their minds about stuff like down in the States about how, say, for instance, Trump had talked about packing the Supreme Court with conservative judges, right? And then it's just that fear only ever goes one way. There's no self-awareness to the fact that say for instance, our country is currently under a stranglehold of liberal bureaucrats, and whether it's the Senate or even if it's our education system, it's like almost 90%, if not over, of the education and teachers and faculty and such are on the liberal side of the aisle, and these things create massive issues where we do get extremely dogmatic narratives going through our society because there's nobody in these institutions to counter them at the base level. But then, there's zero worry coming back the other way with that. And that's where I think a lot of my critiques on this kind of stuff go, where when it comes to, say, classic liberal critiques of the government saying, okay, well, we need to bring power back to the subjugated people. It's like they very, very rarely actually want to give that power back or decentralize that power, but rather they just want to undermine it and then take control of it. Yeah,
I mean, I think the issue that we're going to have here more so than anything is Canada, you and I talk about radical reform. Canada needs its own version of radical reform. A lot of things need to change. And we know that the primary reason or the primary purpose for Pierre Poilievre's first term, if that's all he gets even, would be pretty much just to repeal liberal policy, right? So there's a difference here. Like, I don't know enough about this, but when you're passing policy, you need approval of the Senate. But when you're repealing things and pulling things back, I don't know how significant a role they play in actually backing things off, right? So there's a chance that he's actually able to do a lot to correct course. The problem is he won't be able to improve things or move things in the right direction. One of the things he talks about is reducing the size of government. Will he be able to pass enough or will he be able to pass legislation or policy to, kind of eliminate redundant departments and cut enough of the staff? The other thing, too, is he also wants to cut taxes. And is he going to be able to actually accomplish these things with the Senate kind of blocking or in his way? And can they get in his way enough to make his first term so insignificant that he gets voted out? Which is very possible. And the problem you have here is all he's going to be doing when he's there is trying to appoint conservative senators. So you're getting this kind of, it's interesting. I wonder how long the Senate itself will be used as this pull back and forth between liberals and conservatives right now. And I know it's always been going on for sure. But right now we're so divided. It's because everything's politicized. There's always a conservative viewpoint and a liberal viewpoint on literally everything. So that makes the Senate that much more significant. So I wonder how much of a role they're going to play in actually stifling the progress of Canada over the next decade or so.
I mean, the silver lining is that more and more of the people that have worked with Trudeau in the past or have been appointed by Trudeau to certain positions are turning on him. Yeah. So for instance, Jody Wilson-Raybould, She served as the Minister of Justice as well as an Attorney General and Minister of Veteran Affairs. She said about Trudeau, quote, "There are a lot of pretty words, but there are a lot of promises that have been made and not kept. And that leads, of course, to disillusionment and disappointment," she said in an interview with Reuters in 2021. In her book, she said that she was angry that she had believed Trudeau was, quote, "an honest and good person," when in truth, he would so casually lie to the public and then think he could get away with it. Then also Morneau, another Liberal, in one of his books, he said that the Prime Minister had an inability or lack of interest in forging relationships with me, and as far as I could tell, with the rest of his cabinet, and said that a lot of the people appointed in his cabinet are done so out of tokenizations of being like, oh, well, you're an Indigenous person and we need one of those in there. But then once they're in there, once they've done that forward-facing, like, okay, we're so diverse and inclusive, then he doesn't care about what they actually have to say and just appeals to his small group of political insiders.
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of look at just sort of the Liberal strategy and the Democratic strategy in the States over the last 5-10 years, it's pretty much been they're campaigning on virtue signaling. That's all it is. They're not campaigning on making the world a better place. It's all about equality and virtue signaling. You don't actually get anything done with that strategy. There's nothing that you actually accomplish because your only goal is to have more equality, have more diversity in the system. It's not actually about doing it because that is the goal. So once you get it there, you don't actually care about employing any other strategy to help the public. But I think that's actually what's coming to light right now. And I think that's why so many people are pissed off and pushing back against the Liberals, because that's not a policy strategy. That's not the way. Your government can't survive on that. And I think that's what we're seeing happen now. But I mean, back to the Senate issue. I mean, I guess it just depends how rational the people in the Senate are being, because like you said, people are turning on Trudeau, right? And I don't care if you're left or right or whatever. If you actually look at the policy and you look at the impact of the policy of what the Liberals have implemented and what their strategy is moving forward, it's not good. It's not good for anybody except for political elites and whatever oligarchies running this country. That's the only people it's really good for, right? And I understand being in the Senate, you got a cushy job and you're making good money and everything's fine. But if they're actually being pragmatic, if they're doing what's right for Canadians, that's kind of my hope, that maybe they will kind of go, well, I wasn't really appointed as a Liberal, because he's doing this all under this whole like, well, there's no political affiliation, except everybody he's choosing is Liberal. Yeah. No, it's very clear. Like, I've done a bit of research. It's super obvious, but they're not being appointed as a Liberal. They're being appointed as someone that's supposed to be nonpartisan. It's kind of the idea. So I'm wondering if that might actually work in Canada's favor, because, I think a lot of times when you look at policy and you look at politics, both sides are actually trying to find a solution to the problem. They just have different ways of doing it, right? And I think that's where people kind of get lost here. Like, everyone wants to solve, say, world hunger. No one wants it to get worse. They just have different strategies on how they're going to do it. Everyone wants to keep kids safe. They just have a different idea of what that means. For Liberals, it means allowing them to change their gender. For us, it doesn't. To us, that's insane, right? But you see what I mean. But when you look at the Liberal policy, like the one I just mentioned about children, there's a lack of logic in actually solving any of those problems. And I'm hoping that intelligent people that are they're well over, like they're 50, 60 in that range, so they've got a good amount of life experience, can see that and go, look, I'm a lifetime Liberal, let's say that's their strategy, but these policies aren't actually solving the problem. So the only thing we can actually do, if we're being pragmatic, is kind of back a lot of the Conservative policies today. So I'm hopeful that logic wins, but we know how that's worked out for us in the past.
Yeah, we'll see. Because where I was trying to get to with the with the people turning on him that were past appointed by him was, like, obviously it's not a direct analogy because Stalin was considerably worse than Trudeau. Now, I think if you gave Trudeau the power that Stalin had, that I think, he's one and the same. He's extremely, I think he's a sociopath and definitely narcissistic and could reach those same levels if he thought he could get away with it. But anyways, whenever Stalin died and Khrushchev was appointed as the head of the Soviet Union, he came in right away and did a speech and announced that the Soviet Union was going to undergo a process of de-Stalinization, and essentially just said to everybody in the government, like, got up, and people were astounded because you would get killed for saying something like this even just a week before Stalin died, where he got up on stage and was like, we're all going to admit that that guy was fucking crazy, right? And then like we're going to go a different route and then yeah, it was a slow process after that, but they did very much kind of detangle themselves from Stalin. And I think, you know, could the Liberal Party do something similar where as soon as Trudeau's not the head of the Liberal Party anymore, everybody in it just kind of goes, okay,
whoa,
can we take a step back and just realize that this party kind of got a little insane here?
I hope so. I guess the only challenge I have with that is that there's a lot of young Liberal supporters still. There are, you know, that's it. And the reason is because, well, some of them are young and idealistic. Others are just lifers, and they're just kind of that's the maybe the party their family supported, so they're there. But the other side of that is the Liberals control the media. And this goes back to our free speech problem from the RCMP. If you control the narrative, you tell people what to think. You give them your side of the story. You can make yourself look innocent. Yeah. You can do something brutal and say, it was in self-defense. It's just one person's story, right? And the reason I use that example is because that's kind of how egregious the things he's done, how bad they've been for Canada. But he's the one telling the story. So it does make it a little bit more challenging. But I don't know. That'd be kind of fun to see.
Yeah, for sure. I think more people are waking up to the true nature of his government, which there was actually a Henry McKen once satirized a government that sounds remarkably like Trudeau's, where he said it's a collection of individuals whose only talent was getting and holding office and whose principal device was to search out groups who pant and pine for something they can't get and promise to give it to them. 9 out of 10 times, that promise is worth nothing. The 10th time it is made good by looting A to satisfy B, which kind of brings us into our next topic here for the day, which is the Canadian government is allocating $224 per day for each illegal immigrant to cover their cost of living. So the federal government allocates approximately $224 per day or $81,760 per year for each illegal immigrant to cover accommodation, food, and essential items. This figure includes $140 per night per room for accommodation and roughly $84 per day for food. Additionally, essential items like toiletries, medicines, and diapers are provided at no cost, potentially increasing the daily total. By comparison, old age security pays recipients $26 daily. So is this the political equivalent of spitting in the face of Canadian taxpayers?
Of course it is. They don't want this information coming out. And what was it? 45,000 illegal immigrants came in last year?
Yeah.
So it's just ridiculous. I mean, the average Canadian right now earns about $63,000 per year. However, after taxes, it's about $45K a year. That's their take home. So if you include the toiletries that they said were free, they're pretty much getting double what the average Canadian takes home, you know, and that's what this is. It's after tax, right? When you look at what they're getting, right? So the other figure I looked at was the average household income for 4 in Canada is just over $75,000. So yeah, this is a complete spit in our face, right? How do they justify this, and how do they say that it's good, right? How do the Liberals continue to say, well, we've got nowhere to put these people, it's contributing to inflation, the housing crisis, high interest rates, crime, and it's going to cost you $82,000 per person per year. And we've got no real solution for this except to bring in more people. How are the Liberals spinning this story? How does anybody think this is a good strategy for anyone in this country?
Yeah. Well, and then you hear too, the only thing that they want to pay attention to is, say, the rising levels of disdain that Canadians have for these immigrants that are moving in en masse. I think we've even talked about it before where, you know, we have a couple friends that have immigrated here and very much say it's like, even though they've been here for a long time, they can even feel the sentiment start changing towards them. And it's very true. And you know, if they're going to sit here and say that we need to be extremely tolerant and all of these kind of stuff. And I've said many times, again, I think any frustration about these things should be pointed at the politicians that are putting these things in place, not necessarily the immigrants that are just searching for a better life. I mean, at the end of the day, if I was living in a lot of the places these people are living in, and I had a country like Canada saying, hey, come here and we'll give you $81,000 a year, there's zero reason for me not to, so I don't fault those people at all. But it's just take away, for instance, Canada or immigration, any of these kind of things. If a third party, came in and started robbing money from party A, like that example I was giving before, and said that I'm going to take this money that you don't have. You're already struggling, Group A. I'm going to take that money and give it to Group B. How do you not expect Group A to all of a sudden start having negative emotions towards Group B?
Of course.
It's inevitable.
As a standalone, 100%. But when you consider that one group are Canadians and it's your Canadian government for people that are not a part of this country, that are not being forced to assimilate in any way, shape, or form, which just kind of further breaks down our own national identity, yeah, like, of course, that makes it exponentially worse. So yeah, it's absolutely a spit in the face of Canadians. I just don't know how we remedy this, because their strategy over the next 2 years is to, or the next 3 years actually, is to bring in another 485,000 permanent residents in 2024, 500,000 in 2025, and 500,000 in 2026. And if you include the non-permanent residents at the same rate we had in 2023, that looks about 1.4 to 1.5 million people per year. And if you just use the same figures here again, well, that's probably going to be another 50,000 illegal immigrants per year that are going to continue costing us this kind of money. So what's the strategy here? Everything just keeps getting worse. The housing crisis is going to get worse. Inflation's not going to settle. There's no way. And the only way to keep that under control is to hike interest rates. So what is the plan here? And it looks like they don't have one, and it's just going to continue to just roll down this hill. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's concerning when it's not rocket science to understand the consequences of these policies, and we sit here and say, what's the goal? Well, they know that what their stated aims of, economic prosperity and rebuilding the middle class and doing this, that's not going to be the effect of any of these. There's zero data or anything pointing towards that being the case. So is the effect that it's currently having, which is, deteriorating our society, is that not maybe the goal then? Because all of this, everything they're doing is just pushing, more gasoline on that fire.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was actually kind of funny was that I think there was a Ledger poll that was done, surveying new immigrants, and more of them, despite the fact that they're getting free money and they were shipped in by the Liberals, more of them actually support the Conservatives. I mean, that says a lot to me, you know what I mean? It's considering the situation. You'd think that they would be diehard Liberal because of what they've done, but even those people are saying like, oh, this is not working out well. If I'm going to stick around, we got to go with these guys.
Yeah. Well, there is something to be said that a lot of the places in the world that our current immigration numbers are coming from aren't exactly on board with a lot of the social justice and, say, for instance, very specifically the LGBTQ stuff that the Liberals are peddling. That's right. A pretty quick way to get, say, a lot of these more religious types of people that are coming over here off of supporting you.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's a pretty simple idea. If you're here promoting LGBTQ and the group rights, that's your whole strategy to a fault, almost, let's say. If you're doing that, and then you're trying to convince everybody in Canada to go along with it, even though they're crossing the line a little bit, which we talked about last week, but then you're shipping in a bunch of people from other countries that don't support that policy. What do you think's going to happen? You're going to see a massive rise in hate towards these groups, but you're doing it to yourself. You're adding the oil to the water. This is on you, right? So then that kind of begs the question, like, do they see this coming? Do they know it's going to happen? Or is this their strategy to then implement other censorship laws? I don't know. Sometimes when I get into this, it becomes this kind of like, it becomes this thing that rolls down the hill, the snowball that just gets too big. And I'm like, am I gluing these things together? I guess I get a little bit lost in it, in the sense that it's like, when you look at how all these policies work together, you're just creating a monster.
Well, there's that great line from The Dark Knight, right? Some men just want to watch the world burn, and I think it's a very unsettling idea. This is something that even Peterson has talked about in regards to Hitler before, right? Where people were saying, on the face of it, Hitler was saying he was going to create a 1,000-year Reich, that the German people were going to be prosperous and have the best society that would last, a civilization that would flourish and last longer than any civilization before it, and all of this kind of stuff. But then you look at what was the end outcome. Well, the end outcome was Germany crumbling from both sides as the Soviet Union and America descended into Berlin. And one thing, like none of what happened in practice aligned with what he was stating his goals were with that whole thing. And this was where Peterson made the observation where if you're ever struggling to find somebody's motivations, look at the outcome and infer motivation. It's like, look at the outcome of what they've done and assume that that's what they wanted.
That's a good strategy. I like that, especially considering they've got a lot more people that are thinking these things through and understanding this stuff at a deeper level than you and I. Like, I know you and I are intelligent enough to put these things together to understand it, but yeah, that's a fair point. When you actually look at what's happening, it's pretty hard for their goal to have been anything else than this particular terrible situation. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's a good point.
Well, and two, even in the Soviet Union, right? Their entire idea was to create a utopia of equality, but it created mass poverty, starvation, cannibalism was even prevalent, all of this kind of stuff. And what ended up happening was you would have people in the political party that were rolling around on luxury trains and staying in luxury hotels, very similar to what we were just talking about in regards to the COP28 thing, right? Where the state was taking money from the peasants and the people in the party were living large at their expense while claiming that they were creating that everything they were doing was for the most equal and fair society that has ever been built, right? And so again, it's this Orwellian double-think idea where you say one thing and it's the exact opposite. It's war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, right? Same kind of thing. Equality is inequality, is us living large while you guys all suffer. And we've seen this, right? Like Canada just dropped from 6th to 33rd on the quality of life index. So not over 1 year, but since Trudeau took office in 2015, Canada has fallen 24 places on the World Quality of Life Index. The overall quality of life score is based on 8 key factors: purchasing power, safety, healthcare, cost of living, property price to income ratio, traffic commute time, pollution, and climate. According to the data, Canada has declined in every category. Even the pollution index, which ideally should decrease, has worsened under Trudeau. In other words, by every metric used to determine quality of life, Canada is performing worse than before Trudeau took office in terms of worldwide rankings. So again, when everything they have done, everything has led to us being worse off in every measurable way, then you have to just assume at a certain point that this is what they want.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, you can make one mistake, maybe two. You could lose your ranking on a few things by a couple points, but some of those are pretty significant changes. And yeah, overall, to see us drop by that much, it's hard not to see it for anything more than exactly what it is. Especially after this much time. You could be like, well, he just got in there, he's just kind of finding his footing, whatever. It's been 9 years. Mm-hmm. The guy's on a warpath to ruin the country. He's doing a great job.
Yeah. Well, and two, when you look at even, you don't typically think of, say, the Liberal Party as the best option out of the two for things like on the economic front. So, okay, let's even give them a pass there and say, yeah, okay, it makes sense that maybe your track record on things like housing prices wouldn't be all that great. But when everything you do, you're saying whether is coming down to fighting climate change and pollution in pro-environment, and even that, your number one stated goal is declining, like what leg do you possibly have to stand on?
No, I agree.
All right, our next story for the day, we've got Canada has just started the largest tax increase you've never heard of. So the latest federal budget in Canada did little to tackle the country's growing productivity issues. Instead, the government chose to focus on what it calls generational fairness. Of particular concern is a substantial increase in taxes on new business investments across the Canadian economy. So what exactly is this tax change and why does it matter? It relates to how quickly companies can write off capital investments, and it's connected to corporate tax changes from 2018 that are now being phased out. In 2017, the U.S. reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21% and allowed companies to immediately deduct the full cost of certain capital investments. Previously, companies would spread these deductions over several years. Analyses suggest that this boosted the U.S. economy by 1.7%, increased wages by 1.5%, and expanded the total capital stock by 4.8% due to higher investment levels. So to remain competitive, Canada pretty much followed suit. However, now they are pulling back everything on that. And overall, the effective tax rate on new investments in Canada is set to rise from 13.7% to nearly 17%. And some types of investments will face even larger increases. So what are the domino effects that such tax measures will have on the Canadian economy?
Well, it's a couple things, right? So first thing is when you look at that number going from 13% to 17%. So the general rule of thumb is a 1 for 1. So every percentage of increase, you're going to have a percentage of decrease in capital investment in the country. So they're going to decrease capital investment by probably 4%, which is very significant considering. And you know, the challenge we have right now is this is the time when Canada needs it most. And then they're implementing policies like this, right? And it's kind of hard to quantify precisely, but the general principle is pretty clear. By reducing returns to investors, fewer investments will be made in this country. That's exactly what's going to happen here. And, you know, unfortunately, to boost Canadian labor productivity, we need to improve business investment incentives. So, you know, by doing something like this, unfortunately, the upcoming federal tax changes will do the opposite. And we know too, you and I've had this conversation, when you overtax people, you're basically incentivizing people to find ways around the taxes. You actually decrease the amount that you're going to be able to get because people are going to fight it tooth and nail. They're going to do business offshore. They're going to find other ways to bring in expenses. You know, so instead of phasing out the 2018 tax changes, what they should do is expand them. They should even lower tax rates on investments and construction so they could try to address the housing crisis. But instead, that's actually going up by 2.5%. So overall, like, this is going to be a bigger tax grab than the capital gains increase, but it's actually going to hurt the Canadian economy significantly more. It's just one of those things you don't really see, but there's just not going to be any investment in this country. I mean, what is there to invest in this country right now other than the natural resources? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it starts a positive feedback loop, right? If you were even to take it outside of something like national economy for a minute, like even if you're looking at, let's say, drinking, for instance, a lot of people will have a drink when they feel stressed, right? But then the next day your cortisol levels are higher, which means you're more stressed, which means you now feel like having a drink. And then it's just a vicious cycle, right? Where the drink is causing your stress and the stress is causing you to drink. And it just goes back and forth, back and forth. And same thing with something like this. What we're seeing here is you go, okay, you boost your taxes and you create a scenario where you're not competitive on the international stage for tax rates. So more and more businesses either shut down, pull out, they don't invest into that economy, whatever, like we're already seeing where our small businesses and just international investment is actually dropping as well. But then that leads to the government having less overall tax revenue despite increasing it. And then most of the time their solution to that is, well, our tax revenue is going down, so we need to raise it more. And then again, it just creates this vicious cycle where nobody actually wants to put money into this essentially pit of just getting stolen.
Yeah, again, it kind of goes back to our previous conversation. It's pretty clear what the right thing to do here is if you want to improve the economy. In fact, it's very clear. We have examples that have worked historically, and we've seen it in America. They know exactly what to do to fix the problem. They're doing the exact opposite. What the fuck is going on in this country?
And the last story for the day, we've got Ottawa think tank calling TikTok China's Trojan horse and urging Canada to ban the app. So according to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, TikTok is a weapon used by Beijing to access and influence Western democracies. The report's author describes TikTok's role in advancing Beijing's political narratives and strategic goals. The report draws attention to Xi Jinping's comparison of data to new oil resources, emphasizing its transformative power and the advantage it provides to whoever controls it. This viewpoint shapes how Beijing perceives and utilizes TikTok, integrating data harvesting and mass surveillance into its broader strategic objectives. In terms of Canada's response, the report urges concrete actions to counter foreign information manipulation and interference. It recommends enforcement of ByteDance's divestiture from TikTok under the Investment Canada Act. So we've seen similar actions taken in America. Does this mean it's the beginning of the end for TikTok?
Yeah, guys, TikTok's on its way out. 100%, right? You're getting attacked from all angles, and I'm of the opinion it really has to do with just the fact that it's China, right? Because if you look at what like Meta or Facebook's done, look what they did in the Middle East. Why weren't they attacked for that? They basically they contributed to and were a big part of the uprising over there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it shouldn't have happened or that those people shouldn't have fought back. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean though is that tool was used as a conduit to accomplish that goal, right? So you could look at and say, and we all kind of know too what Facebook and Meta and what they're doing with data, and they're reselling it to Netflix. They just did it the other day. These guys aren't innocent either, right? This is all just about it being China controlling this data. And look, at the end of the day, I don't really have a problem with removing TikTok in terms of China's influence over the world, because it really can do a lot. They're like, look, this could be used as a tool of basically espionage all over the world, right? And I understand that can be a problem. However, I don't feel very confident. I don't feel much better knowing that the American government can do it instead of China. I don't see how that benefits you and I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is just the same thing for sure that we do, but then on the other end, it's whether it's Chinese, Chinese communist interests or whether it's American interests being pushed forward. And
which one's worse?
Yeah.
You know, you kind of sit there and go, well, they're both fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, either way, we're not safe. All this highlights is that these things are poisonous in this sense, in the sense of surveillance. They're all the same. They all have the same tools to do these things, 100%. It's all a matter of, well, this guy's good and this guy's bad, and we just have to decide. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like like whoever writes the history books is the one who's the good guy.
Yeah, and when it comes to TikTok, I almost have a little bit of a bias against them as well, just because like even it is crazy how quickly they censor on there. I mean, our stuff gets censored and pulled down all the time for no reason, and then even too, like I had a TikTok page that had like somewhere close to 80,000 or something like that on there. Just one day, just vanished. No even like, hey, this is why we took it down. I hadn't even made a post on there in a while or something. Just account erased.
You know what? I actually find that TikTok is fairly liberal. It's actually the most censored platform for me of the ones that I use.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, obviously Twitter's the one that's the least censorship heavy, but we don't have a significant following on that one. Instagram I find to be pretty neutral. They didn't really censor any of my stuff through COVID. But TikTok, yeah, like half the shit I put up there just gets censored and pulled down. So, I mean, it's weird too, because it actually, like, sure, it's China and they want to push back against that and whatever their communist regime is, but also like it's pretty much pro-democrat, pro-liberal. Like if you wanted to have a platform that was going to help you win an election, it's probably that one.
Well, and to even think about it, okay, what do we know from that side of the aisle? What does their baseline kind of ideology tell them? It's that the West is evil, that we need to do away with capitalism, that we need to essentially commit cultural suicide. And it's like, yeah, why wouldn't they be promoting that narrative, right?
Yeah, true. But I mean, but those are the people that are implementing this policy.
Yeah.
That's what I find odd, because, you know, if you're just thinking about purely what's going to benefit me to stay in power, well, yeah, I mean, TikTok is going to benefit the liberals and the Democrats. However, they're the ones that are pushing this, right? So it's interesting.
It is, dude, it is crazy when you realize how much the CCP, even outside of TikTok, has its hands in our political system in Canada and even just around the world for that instance. Like there was a recent viral video that happened in the UK where Chinese reporters for like CCP state journalistic outlets, they were reporting, and they went up to somebody in a public space and started berating them about how they're not allowed to record there because the guy was just playing piano, happened to catch these CCP reporters in the background, and then they just like lost it on this guy. And then even too, I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Sam Cooper, who I think we're going to be chatting to soon, hopefully. But his book has been extremely illuminating on how deep China is in Canada. And one thing that he points out in there is how, yeah, they use these things, whether it be, he didn't say TikTok specifically, but the surveillance that the CCP has on people in Canada. And I know that they also use TikTok for that matter. But in September 2019, a Uyghur woman was protesting in Vancouver against the mass detention of Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region in China. And then a Chinese woman approached the protester and repeatedly told her to leave. The protester later got a call from a man with a strong Mandarin accent, and she said, quote, "The guy told me I have to stop what I'm doing, stop my activism, or else you have to worry about your family in China. I said, who are you? And he didn't answer, and then he hung up. I felt extremely shocked because I live in Canada and I feel alone and unprotected. I felt 100% this call is from the Chinese government. So yeah, very similar. Like even Chinese protesters, we know that there's CCP backed police stations.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say
whether
too.
it be in Ontario or Montreal.
They're all over the world. They have them everywhere.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's like, how is this happening?
But what's annoying, though, to me is the Liberal government knows about these things in Canada and lets it happen. They just they basically ignore it. They're basically just not addressing it. The media will say something, the government will say zero about it. They don't care. They just let it happen. So it's kind of like, we know they're in bed with the Chinese when it comes to the elections. We know they're in bed with the Chinese when it comes to these police stations. And obviously they're allowing things like that to happen with the Uyghur Muslim in Canada over in BC. Yet they're going to block this one. They're going to block TikTok. Maybe it's one of those things that they're doing to be like, hey, we're fighting back. Maybe this one's too obvious. So we'll let them get away with these 9 things. But this one is going to be the example we're going to make just to show you that we're not really pro-China. Maybe that's what that is. Because I don't really see any other reason to do it otherwise.
Yeah, and you just I'm glad you wrapped up that point, because that's where I was trying to get to, essentially, where it's like TikTok is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to how much China is interfering with our ways. In that book that I was mentioning by Sam Cooper, he details all the way back into the 80s and the 90s of how the Chinese Communist Party has just been utterly ruining us from the inside, even stuff like with how they donate to politicians, how they infiltrate political parties, how they're funding our casinos, how they're taking over the money laundering through our real estate systems. All of this, it's like, it's deep.
It is very, and the thing is, for the most part, I don't think there's anything you can even do.
Yeah,
I think it's just going to happen. Like, what policy would you implement to slow those things down? I don't think there's anything there. But that's actually one benefit. I don't agree with how China operates in terms of their civil liberties, obviously. But it's interesting because they have these governments that are in power for decades, and it stays within the family. You can implement policy that takes 20, 30 years to really come to fruition because you have that kind of time. And that's sort of the disadvantage. And like I said, I prefer democracy, but that's kind of the disadvantage of our system. You look at countries like Russia or like China, and because they have these long-term regimes, they can make long-term impacts, which we don't really do very well. It's kind of this, like, they're playing chess, we're playing checkers, in a sense, right? Obviously, there's a lot of downsides to their systems, especially for the people. But when you look at it at a global stage, if you were looking at this as a game and how you're going to win, if I was trying to take over the world, I would want that system because that's the one that works.
Yeah, well, as Trudeau said, he admires their basic dictatorship because it gives them the ability to turn around their economy on a dime, right? And yeah, like, even you look at it from defensive measures, not even from an offensive side, right? Where the CCP is involved in every major corporation in China. They have. I think it's a genuine rule that if you have a corporation in China, you have to have at least one CCP member sitting on your board, right?
It's if you're a particular size. They don't care if you own a Subway. They don't give a shit about that. It's if you are of a particular volume and size in terms of revenue.
Yeah, then you need a CCP. Yeah.
But that's the other thing. So I think it's interesting what they get to do, and this is kind of my game of chess over there. They get to use all these corporations that produce all of these goods, and they get to use it like this chessboard. Whereas instead of them saying, well, this is where you'd make the most money, go that direction, they go, no. I'm going to get you to go right instead of left because you're going to help all these other companies, and that's going to help me build this, which is going to help me take over this country and infiltrate this over here. And they get to sort of integrate all of the really, really they get to integrate all of the really successful companies into their sort of chess strategy and how they're going to manage to take over the world. It's pretty interesting because I actually think that China is winning this new world, this new game of warfare. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what you'd call it, but they're infiltrating peacefully, even though it's very aggressive.
It's very economic warfare.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, but they also do things like they start these programs where, like, hey, I forget the name of it. It's kind of annoying. They have all the top mines in China in all these different fields, and then they integrate them in other governments in other places. That's how we had that. That's how we had those Chinese people at our level 4 lab in Winnipeg, right? And then they just bring back the information. Now China's got it. They've got such an interesting and well thought out integrated strategy in how they're sort of attacking the world these days. It's pretty wild.
Well, and too, when they're sitting on all those corporations in these areas, they can it's very hard for, say, a Western corporation to turn down money. We want that immediate short-term profit, right? Yep. So when let's say you're opening a casino in Vancouver, BC, and you've got a mega donor from China saying they'll come in and they'll help buy in and fund these projects. Well, you're not in a position, you want that short-term gain. Whereas if that happens reverse, and obviously they have their own motives when they're trying to invest in that kind of stuff. And then, but on reverse, it's like, good luck if you're a foreign investor getting in shaking hands and putting in a agenda in a corporation in China.
No chance.
They're going to look at you and just be like, well, we're not allowing your money in here.
They've done some pretty actually interesting things recently in the last year or two. They took over a major tech company in the US where they basically just scooped up enough percentage. They got 51%, locked the doors, closed it, and pulled everything over to China.
Wow.
But more specifically on the topic of TikTok, the Chinese government basically said, you're not selling it. They won't even let them. So it's interesting to see. They're like, yeah, you've got a foreign government agent working within your company, but they're making all the decisions. They won't even allow them to sell for hundreds of billions of dollars. They're like, nope, not a chance. We're definitely not giving up this information. We're just going to close down in that state. We don't even care.
Yeah, they'd probably rather just take the financial hit than allow these governments and other companies to know what they've been doing.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
For sure. All right. Anything else you wanted to add today, brother?
That's everything.
All right. Before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our website to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week, blendrnews.com. That's BLENDR news.com, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.